So, the work session packets, you've got two documents from me. You've got a short little memo kind of explaining the factual background for the model electric ready and solar code being part of your discussion. And then there's also a letter that generally expresses disappointment with the state's mandate to adopt this electric ready and solar code. So kind of just going briefly through my memo. When any municipality, home rule or statutory, updates an energy code, traditionally an update would be like we're doing here from 2018 to 2021. If that comes between July 1st, 23 and June 30th, 26, you not only have to adopt the 2021 IECC, but also the model electric ready and solar ready code. If the group decided to push the adoption of these updated codes further down the line to, let's say, arbitrarily July 1st, 2026, then you would be looking at also adopting the state's model low energy and carbon code, which has not been developed yet, but is actively being developed. So if you punted on this, you'd be looking at potentially adopting 3 new things rather than 2. While we are a home rule municipality, the laws of the town may be preempted by the state under certain circumstances. There's 3 categories of regulatory matters that I outlined: local concern, state concern, or mixed concern. Generally, there's no clear test of whether a matter is local, statewide, or mixed concern. But when the legislature, as they did here, states that they have a statewide interest in requiring an energy efficient code, that's kind of their signal of saying, hey, this is a statewide interest and we want to preempt the home rule power at this point. While that's not the end all be all, that legislative declaration is certainly given some deference and authority when a court reviews. With that being said, we had this letter drafted up that Carlos sent me. I kind of adopted it from a letter that you all previously sent to the state in regards to the affordable housing bill from last year with 23264, if I'm off the top of my head.
213.
213, yeah. So if you want to change this letter or kind of fashion it to what you feel like you'd like to see out of it, the time is kind of now, and then at a future meeting we can decide whether or not we want to send a letter, but at least getting some direction on what the letter would like to say would certainly be helpful for staff. And with that, I'll kind of shut up and let you guys talk and ask questions.
Yeah, and you all, if I could, just real quick, more of a little introduction. Home rule and local control, as you all know, is a big issue for me and something that I feel like I talk about every day with somebody. And we're about to get into that discussion, but I just wanted to mention something up front about this letter. I think a letter, essentially this letter is a letter that we should send, but I don't think it should be tied to a particular issue. In this case, the energy code. My issues with what the state is trying to do to remove our local control are broad and varied. And if this were coming in a vacuum, if this was the only infringement on our home rule authority, I don't know that I would have a problem with it all by itself. And it's unfortunate, when I'm talking about this, it's often good ideas that are implemented in a bad way. So I've had things from the state like, wow, that's a great idea, except at the point where you're forcing us to do it or not allowing us to tweak it to fit our circumstances. So that's where it goes wrong for me most of the time. It's usually not the underlying idea, and that is the case here. The other reason I'd like to detach it from this issue is that this bit about statewide interest seems stronger on this particular issue. Statewide energy concerns. So I actually feel like the state is more in its lane on this subject matter than some of the other ways they're trying to infringe on our home rule authority. But I thought it was appropriate that we talk about this tonight because it's slippery slope. You know, our home rule authority is going to be eroded one small piece at a time. It's not going to come all at once. And so if you buy into the slippery slope argument, then this is part of the slippery slope. But to take it back around, I would like to send a letter to our state elected officials that generically says we're upset at your infringement on home rule authority and not tie it to this energy code. So with that, hopefully you didn't forget what you were gonna say here.
Did not forget. I just want clarification, what's in the mandate is really only things that are in the 2021 rule, and it's just saying that you can't take any of those pieces out.
Well,
I mean, is there anything beyond what is in the 2021 code that they're mandating?
well, there's that 2021 energy code, right?
So
And then
that's
there's
That's
the-
in the 2021 code.
Yeah. And
Well,
then-
it's
Well, and then there's the
It's Colorado,
separate
yeah.
Colorado electric ready and solar ready code, which the staff was talking about. That
That's the mandate.
is part of the mandate as well. But if you were
does it
updating,
require anything different than if we just adopted the 2021 code?
those three things.
yes, it's the adoption of that additional solar ready code.
I thought those were in the 20.
No, that's Colorado separate.
No,
That was
there's-
how they were pulling the slippery maneuver and attaching it to all these other codes so that they could get it pushed in.
And Jay, you kind of touched on this, but the statute permits amendments to these energy codes that we are required to adopt, so long as the amendments do not decrease the effectiveness of the energy code. What that means, I would leave to the experts that
Yeah.
have actually looked at these codes, but you could tweak these mandated codes a bit. I don't know how much and what would hit that threshold of just decreasing the effectiveness.
We'd have to argue that adding those things is effective and removing them makes them less effective. So what do they consider adding those three things being effective to do? Set up for success or like?
I think just like the future energy code that hasn't been promulgated yet, there's a lot of this that's.
Nick, just a quick clarification, when you said you could tweak, you know, the codes, who's you? Is that us or is that them?
You could pass an ordinance amending the code like it amends, like you've amended the
But we
building
can't
code.
override the mandate.
And all
Even though
those.
it's their code that we're overriding and they put this, you know, requirement in there, so they really have no mechanism to hold our feet to the fire, is what you're saying?
Well, these amendments that you would make could not decrease the effectiveness of the code, so I don't know how.
As proven by who?
That's the $1 million question, right?
Are you looking for data again? You and all this fact and data.
So you don't want to tie this letter to the specific issue, but I would be fine if you're fine alluding to, hey, we're doing this thing, and once again, it's brought up that you guys are stepping on our toes.
Yeah, and what I was gonna ask from you all was just license to work with staff to tweak this letter, but I appreciate that input. And And yeah, we could maybe give like a small list of examples so that it's again not tied to.
Any one.
I've been making my own list, so. So.
I guess what I'm saying is, I think this accomplishes that. You don't specifically call out the mandate, but you say, we're working on this topic. And in us working on this topic, we realize once again, you're overstepping. your
Yeah.
bounds.
Yeah, and again, so.
And give examples of, you know, like with the housing thing, you know, this is just
Yeah.
another example of, yeah.
Something along those lines, and again, it's something I'll work with staff on, and if you like, I'll bring it back to get the final okey dokey from y'all, but. You know, I think tonight is like, how do we proceed with this preemption thing?
I'd say to you that I understand your point of removing these, but providing examples.
Yeah.
Just shows the legislature and the governor that,
We're paying attention.
no, that you've done this to us, you know, you've taken these little bits away from us, you've taken these little bits away from us. And yeah, it doesn't look like you're gonna stop, but by putting this in there, it's like, this is the red line. This is the line in the sand that we're just not gonna go for anymore. And I think it's more powerful like that.
Well, won't they reply, well, you're gonna go for it on July 1st, 2026?
But who knows, maybe something changes between us. Yeah.
And that's very possible,
Yeah.
you know, that is very possible.
I don't like them stepping on our toes, obviously, but I also don't want us to take steps backwards and not move forward with these codes that have other really valid.
Yeah.
things
Well,
in
and I
them.
think that's why staff, I don't wanna put words in their mouth, but I think that's why staff offered this letter as kind of what your position is, that, in case we wanna move forward with adopting the 2021 codes, that we would also let the state know that it was with some pain and reluctance that we did it because of this other preemption issue, so.
And I agree with that.
I'd also be fine amending the code. Just as a. Not thumb in the eye to the state after the fact, like, prove these are effective and prove that we've made your code not effective. And maybe make it more of a.
Well, I did ask the question of our legal counsel if that was a possibility, so
Yeah, you can, like I said.
I think the question, to be specific, I think the question is, could we amend the code as we see fit without
Mandate.
adopting the 2021 code? Could we amend our 2018 code is what we're on? 15. Could we amend our 15 code and make changes that we want to make and not incur the mandate is the question, I think.
That's.
By that, you're referring to a lot of the beneficial things that we deem positive.
Like, let's say we wanted to do let's say we
want.
wanted to do the contractor licensing thing. We think
Yeah.
like that's a really good thing and we want to do that. Could we graft that on to our 15 code and not incur the mandate from the state?
I think you could, because the mandate comes from adopting or updating a building code. And if you've already adopted the 2015 codes that are on the book, so you wouldn't be re-adopting them, you'd be amending them. And you wouldn't be updating them, because an update would be 2015 to 2021, that would be an update, so it is kind of a circumvention, but. I think that comes in with a lot more work for staff, because then it turns into a line by line reading of the 2015 code compared to the 2021 codes.
Yep.
And essentially amending the 2015 code in every instance that you feel like it needs to match that 2021 code.
And things like the windows and the insulation and so there, I mean, there's so many things that are good and just maybe planning on codes. It just seems.
But are you
we've got
willing to give up autonomy for that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
to me, that's one of those drips in the bucket, and it's acknowledging that position is like, well, yeah, it's fine, but you know, it's only one rule, like. I'm rarely absolute, I'm pretty absolute. It just can't.
I'm with you.
Jim can't come around to these kicks at home rule. It's eventually going to be completely depleted, in my opinion.
Pretty soon you won't know, pretty soon you won't know that you've lost it all.
Totally. So I'm gonna struggle to come around on this. So.
Well, my struggle is not so much about the code. My issues aren't with the code. My issues are with the state, and so the path forward essentially, is full of landmines, is all I can see. The most relevant part of my disagreement with it is the, state essentially slipping in, something nefariously. It's just, how they're acting. And that's my issue. It's not with the code. And so how we send them a letter and document, different instances of, or examples of their overreach and say, no, we're not, we're not taking this. And the door that opens up, is having, you guys doing your happy dance. Yeah, we're gonna get paid. Because we'd be setting ourselves up for a path down, through the, legal system that is gonna be expensive. Probably, you guys would probably have to take on a class action to represent everybody in the state. But I'm, I guess, back to my point, I have nothing against the new code. Well, I shouldn't say nothing. I have very little against the new code. But I can't, with a clear conscience, sign up for their program. So however we can work around that, I think it is our civic responsibility to resist their efforts to usurp our authority.
Right. Question for staff regarding the idea of amending versus updating. You've done legwork on getting us to this point. Generally understand where I think a majority of us stand. Rather than kick this back to you to just continuously just plug away at this, is there a way to package this and subcontract that changes the code out to a third party so you can move on to your next thing?
As far as farming it out, I don't think so, because I think these are all personal and we want our signature on the language. So I don't see us farming it out. And I think we would also, if you chose this pathway, really, or I would personally really want to know what you mean by, if it's adding all the amendments that we've put in here to the 15 going through, and then looking through and seeing what if there's other things that we would like to update because there's really good reasons to update them. That research, we kind of would want, I guess, clear direction of how you would like us to do that.
Well, let me ask it in a different way.
Yeah.
You're comfortable with the discussions we've had and the changes that you've suggested with the actual language,
Yes.
rather than have our staff go back line item by line item and amend our 2015 code to avoid the trigger of updating the code.
Right.
That seems like paying a finished carpenter to rip out drywall, like, can we pay somebody else to do this repetitive, methodical, probably fairly boring work to get staff back to moving forward and doing other things.
Maybe,
I'm just
I don't
trying to
know who-
avoid kicking this back.
I can comment on that. I mean, as someone who's written this ordinance multiple times, it's very specific to us.
Okay.
And so if we hired somebody to do it, it wouldn't save the staff any time because that person is gonna be asking staff, what amendments do you want? What do you think about this language? They don't know, the community, they don't know the rationale behind, why we're making certain amendments and things. So I see where you're coming from, but I don't think it would accomplish that goal because it's so specific. It would be more like asking, maybe to use this terminology, like an architect from Florida to build a house here or to design a house here. It's the whole different set of considerations you have to take into account in our environment. And that's what the basis of all the amendments are. And then you expand it to the new language, it compounds that.
So it wouldn't be, so it's far easier to adopt the new standard codes with our own language that we've dovetailed onto it, rather than go back to what we have for 2015 and incorporate those new languages and amendments.
I mean, I think
It just seems like the work's already done. I don't know.
I mean, I think what you're asking is, it's a little convoluted because the codes are so intertwined and there's more than like one code, and what you guys have looked at is a very, very small snapshot of what's in there. And trying to apply that to something that's basically 6 years older, I think you could actually get your staff into a bit of trouble and having a lot of conflicting things because these codes reference each other and there's a lot of circles and how you get to the right answer on a certain thing. There's a lot of judgment calls that they have to make in the process of approving plans and deciding things on certain projects. So I think what you're asking would be very challenging potentially if you can get into trouble with it.
Okay, yeah, and I don't know what went into it, and that's why I was going.
I mean, really, this is about 7 books that would stack up about this big that all relate to each other. So what you're asking to do would be extremely challenging.
I'm just curious, Nick, this to you. What happens if the town were to adopt the 21 codes and then as far as the mandate and the solar ready and PV ready,
Just
Take a
ignore
hike.
it, not enforce it.
and not enforce it?
I like where your head's at, Neil.
We've had that answer?
I don't know if I have that off the top of my head. That's it. I mean, so you're basically,
We respectfully decline to accept your mandate.
I mean, is it reasonable to think?
I think, I think that's the avenue, right, is I think they try to sue to get it, probably a court order to update your ordinance.
To really test the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the nuclear.
That's the
Yeah.
So the new question is, what appetite do we have for a court battle?
And I do think that on the other end of that spectrum,
Yeah, you don't adopt.
maybe you never touch the codes, right? And you never trigger any of these mandates. But then next year, the legislature passes something that just says, regardless of updating, you shall adopt this code. You shall adopt code ABC.
And that's a possibility, and then it's also a possibility that they get this broader message and stop trying to do such things. I think that's less likely, but.
or there's an election.
Or there's an election, yeah.
I'd be surprised this has been coming from the Democrats, so
Man, like,
it doesn't make sense to me.
so a quick side note too, another tactic.
Gold pen for me.
Another tactic I'm seeing, not directly relevant, but just, to give you some sense of the different avenues they're pursuing, there's a lot of, there's stuff coming down, I'd call it like the flip strategy, and so they're gonna try to, so they're responsive to the local control thing. People are like, hey, we don't want you to put that on us. Well, what they're doing, I'm trying to think of an example, there's a guns in sensitive spaces legislation, and so it's like whether you could carry a gun in a courthouse or a town hall or things like that. And so, that, you know, typically left up to local control. The state wants to make it illegal to carry in those spaces, but you can opt out of it to fix the local control problem. So I would just call it like the opt-out thing, like we'll make the law, and then to address the local control thing, will allow you to opt out. But it's just the difference between having to do nothing or having to do something. So that it's like, we'll make the law, and then you as a council will have to decide not to do it.
Like you
Okay,
receive newsletters when you.
Don't do it.
or something.
Well, I'm just saying, it's another strategy that's being used to, you know, to do things that cover the entire state.
and if indeed that was the identified path forward, I go, oh yeah, let's adopt it and then, you know, opt out. I would have, that would be simple. If we can make that easy,
No, and I'm with you. My point is though, the easiest thing is to not have to opt out in the first place. And so
well,
they're making
but
us
we're
jump
beyond
through
that already, so,
Yeah.
you know, we have to opt out. As long as opting out was an option.
Well, again,
I
that's the
don't-
bone they're
My
throwing for
understanding
local.
is, my understanding is that, you know, I didn't see anything in my reading.
The opt-out was not about this topic. I was just giving an example of.
Oh, I got
Of
you,
others.
I got you. So how do we,
Yeah, let's do the
how do
next
we
steps.
get that option, how do we get that option on the table other than an election?
Well, and, yeah, I mean, it goes back to the,
CML
Yeah.
committee,
no, the
the-
next steps question, because if the 2021 code is not gonna pass this council, we don't know. You know, there's no point in doing the public hearing.
Well, you would have it on second reading, so
I
if
mean,
it didn't
would
even
be
make it.
embarrassing to do the public hearing and go through all of that and then turn it down.
Or you would present an ordinance to adopt the codes if you don't want to adopt the codes.
Or you would just shoot it down on first reading because you just really don't like it before we even get to public hearing land.
I mean. Go ahead, if you're taking.
Well, I was gonna try to close it out, so if you got something to say, go ahead. So unless anyone disagrees, what I'm gathering at this moment is option number 2.
I would like to send a refined letter.
Accomplishes.
I'd like to send a refined letter and see what type of response we get from the state, if any. Would you expect that they would reply?
You'd have to ask Carla if they ever responded to the
And
first.
to be honest, to be honest, if anything, that just, I think is part of a chain of information that'll be valuable down the road. So I would still like to see that submitted,
Okay.
and see if there's a response that's garnered from that.
You
If
get back
there's,
a thank you for your input.
we have received your email and we will.
Yeah.
You get that much.
That's about what you get.
Good that.
You know, like automations, I'll kill. Give that a window of a couple of weeks, you know, or a month or something, like maybe 3 council meetings. I'm not sure what that number is, it's for discussion, but. And then at that crossroads, we have to consider it.
Well, I'm happy to devote the time to it now or soon.
it has your attention.
I would like the letter rewritten in a way that's comfortable for you to sign and bring it back to us at the next meeting.
Well, how about that? So for next step, let's do that then. We'll work on the letter. We'll try to have a draft of it ready for the next meeting.
Yep, and you guys can vote on sending it or not sending it.
And next step, if needed, maybe the next step is we'll see what we get back from the letter. Maybe the next step is schedule a work session, but let's do the letter as the next step and then what happens after
What
that.
And then as far as the,
Well, I'm just not hearing, I mean, we still haven't really gotten to the ultimate.
Well, part of it, I said it that way because we don't have everybody here,
Yeah,
so we don't know.
well, we may not have everybody here next time either.
I get you, Janet.
I mean, right now, we've had three who said they vote no. I don't know how you vote. Roman and I both said we vote, probably vote for this 2021 adoption. And we don't know what Alec would do, and you don't know what you would do. You haven't really
Yeah, I
expressed.
mean, we've shown an inconsistency with having all of council or incomplete council for decisions, so. I mean, we just have to move
Well, but if
forward.
you end up in a 3-3 tie, it pass.
Which is okay.
That sounds like I think it's worth a vote.
But like, I'm not gonna be at the next meeting, so like. Yeah, like when do we?
Well, I don't think we're gonna be voting on the code next meeting.
No, but
So-
I'm just saying like, who knows when we're gonna have a full council? And we've had incomplete council for other difficult decisions before, so.
Well, does anybody object to the next step being, bringing a letter back to council?
Not at all. Will you give us a chance to weigh in on its contents before you send it, or?
Well, it'll be brought back to you all to look at again. So we have to
It'll
vote.
come in as an agenda item.
But for now, we'll just work with the mayor to kind of get that
Craft that
next
letter.
updated draft, and then whatever the final will look like,
Yeah.
can be voted on.
But Janet, to your point, the only value I will see in another work session is as a discussion on strategy based on lack of response from the state.
Yeah.
And to me, that could be an hour conversation or something, but it feels like that would need further conversation. We're gonna try to work in creative maneuvers or adopt it and then do the exemption component.
I don't see why it can't be an agenda item rather than an hour before a full meeting, for me just gonna have a long meeting.
Well, and again, next meeting, letter, and we'll figure out what happens after that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dotson, for being here. Thanks to staff, all the work on ongoing work that you all are putting in on this. I hope you all understand some of the other issues we're dealing with. I wish it was just adopting code, but we got this other thing, so. All right, 10-minute break. Thank you. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dotson.
Thanks, Tom.